In 1775, Thomas Paine wrote a pamphlet stating that the freedoms of man can only be maintained by limiting the power of government. The pamphlet was called Common Sense. In 2015, it still is Common Sense.
I'm Mark Zaccaria.
And I'm Elizabeth Smith, and this is Common Sense. Welcome back. This is our 26th weekly broadcast. That means we're celebrating our 6-month anniversary on the air. To mark the occasion, this show will feature a series of new interviews with names in the news who have helped us make our first half year a success. Ken Block, Mike Stenhouse, Gary Morse, Mike Riley, Jeff Richard, and others will drop in to update you on the stories they first told on Common Sense. And Mark and I will pop in from time to time to ask our favorite question, are you kidding me? But first, as always, we begin with analysis of some of the top news stories affecting Rhode Islanders today. Mark?
Thanks, Liz. The flurry of activity that concluded the last legislative session was different from the usual land rush we've seen in the past. Instead of jamming hundreds of bills into the last few minutes, this time Speaker Mattiello abruptly closed the session early. That left pundits like me to sort through the debris looking for what actually did pass so we could ask ourselves, why this one? One of the survivors seems a curious choice on its face. The newly minted law strips the authority to select and purchase voting machines from the State Board of Elections and moves it to the Secretary of State's office. It's true that the Board of Elections Executive Director Robert Cando has been in the doghouse recently. It's also true that our existing system of recording and tabulating ballots has been in service for more than 2 decades, and that's old by dog years. It is archaeologically ancient in computer years. Surprise, surprise, the software is no longer supported. Was Cando's can't-do attitude in replacing the hardware just too much for a legislature beset with vendor lobbyists? Or is somebody in the General Assembly actually playing for the rebound rather than the shot? I'm an eternal optimist, so I'm willing to give our new Secretary of State, Nellie Gorbea, the benefit of the doubt. Sure, she's an elected official who's just been put in charge of counting the vote. But I'd guess that the latest in voting machines, and especially their software, features security levels undreamed of by the old optical system being replaced. I hope that the bad boys of the Board of Elections were putting off this much-needed replacement because it is just so easy to fordiddle the numbers on the old equipment that they knew so well. So, if we actually do see the demise of the master lever in 2016, and we have new, nearly tamper-proof voting machines, we may just have to also have a good deal more confidence in the results we see late on election night. Now, I said I'm an optimist, but I'm not completely naive. I will be watching to see that all of this really does improve the lot of the long-suffering Rhode Island voter. Liz?
Thanks, Mark. Planned Parenthood was dealt a blow this week when investigators posing as fetal tissue procurement company met with Planned Parenthood's Dr. Deborah Nucatola, Senior Director of Medical Services. Investigators went undercover to expose options, costs, and procedures used in the procurement of fetal body parts, organs, and other tissues. She describes in great detail how a provider will go about this with such care as to not damage the specimens. The harvesting goes on right up to 24 weeks during the practice of partial birth abortions. Demand is high for fetal human hearts and lungs. She even put a price on these specimens at $30 to $100 per specimen requested. In counter to the just released video on YouTube, Eric Ferrero, Vice President of Communications for Planned Parenthood, had this to say, quote, "In healthcare, patients sometimes want to donate tissue to scientific research that can help lead to medical breakthroughs, such as treatments and cures for serious diseases. Women at Planned Parenthood who have abortions are no different. At several of our health centers, we help patients who want to donate tissue for scientific research, and we do this just like every other high-quality healthcare provider does, with full and appropriate consent from patients and under the highest ethical and legal standards," unquote. Want to donate tissues? We're not talking about Kleenex here. It was almost a year ago when then candidate Raimondo wrapped her arms around Planned Parenthood right here in Rhode Island during the race for governor. Was this why she so wholeheartedly endorsed Planned Parenthood, because harvesting is good for economic development? I'm sorry, Pregnancy is not a disease. Behavior is a choice that often leads to unintended consequences, the real victim of which will never have a chance to voice an opinion. More on this later in this newscast. Mark?
And now to a story that has flown underneath the radar here in the Ocean State. While everyone was looking in shock and horror at the spectacle of the nation of Greece defaulting on a financial obligation, the exact same thing was happening right here in Providence. For years, the city had taken the accounting expedient of using some of the capital in its pension fund for operating expenses on a promissory note basis. Last year, the generally accepted accounting practices used by actuaries to rate public pension funds changed, and the city owed $62 million cash to its pensioners. June 30th was the last day for the city to make that payment, but not a nickel was transferred. Pension fund watchdog and Center for Freedom and Prosperity board member Mike Rowley did not miss that default. He predicted it weeks in advance right here. In fact, astute members of this program's audience will recall that common sense highlighted the coming problem several times before the actual failure to make that payment. Default is just one of the city's pressing problems. Today's commentary focuses on the biggest problem facing the citizens of Providence and by extension the whole state, namely the problem that virtually none of the mainstream media here in Rhode Island have even mentioned the ghost asset, nor the failure of the city to make good on its obligation. So, how's a swamp Yankee to know when he or she is being screwed by government unless the newsies start screaming? Common Sense did. So did Go Local Prov, mostly because Mike Riley is a regular columnist for them. As for the rest of the big-name news outlets, crickets. Projo, silent. Channels 6, 10, 11, 12, silent. Dan McGowan, Ted Nesi, Parker Gavigan, silent. WPRO, silent. Rhode Island NPR, silent. None of the so-called political reporters of the Ocean State said or printed a word about the fact that an already untenable level of pension funding had just become impossible. It appears that none of these organizations cared a whit for the plight of the Providence pensioners, who now find themselves, figuratively, living in Central Falls. What might these retirees have actually said if they'd realized that both David Cicilline and Angel Tavares were reaching into their cookie jar in order to paper over other problems? More importantly, what does that say about who the big-name media actually work for here in Little Rhodey? It's hard enough to plow through some of the intricate stories of corruption and financial legerdemain in these parts when you read or hear them. It's impossible for any citizen, be they concerned or unconcerned, to decide on how well their tax dollars are being managed when there's nothing said about it at all. Liz?
We here at Common Sense wish to extend a sincere congratulations to Roy Bolden, Chairman of the Providence Republican City Committee, Anna Santana, Vice Chair, and Dr. Dan Harrop of the Roosevelt Society. These two organizations have joined forces and, along with the help of the Rhodey YRs, opened the GOP headquarters in Providence this week. The energetic group is focused on bringing a positive, conservative message to the city of Providence. It's a genuine, heartfelt outreach, and the effort is working. According to Chairman Roy Bolden, people don't care how much you know until they see how much you care. Providence is a city that will certainly make a difference in the upcoming 2016 election year. Our heartfelt best wishes go out to everyone for their ongoing effort. Coming up next, we'll hear from the first in a series of old friends of the program. But first, we take time out to pop the question, are you kidding me?
Okay, 6 months ago, the critics claimed Common Sense wouldn't last 6 weeks. Also, at that time, Bernie Sanders was not a player on the national stage. Are you kidding me? Today, this program is gaining confidence in itself and gaining audience. But for now, the same can also be said of Senator Sanders, a recent entrant into the presidential sweepstakes who has been taking the Democrats by storm. He's a self-proclaimed socialist who believes that all financial benefit should come to individual citizens directly from their government. What is more, the gentleman from Vermont actually believes this government is capable of effectively administering that level of disbursement. Like most American socialists, read limousine liberals, Sanders gives no thought whatsoever to the source of all that cash he wants the government to distribute so fairly. In other words, Thomas Paine would have recognized him as a threat to individual liberty. I know I do. Look, in the 3rd grade, when I first went out for Little League Baseball, I learned that nothing in life is either fair or guaranteed. That day, I understood the object lesson that neither my school, nor my church, nor my family, nor my town was going to see to it that I succeeded as a pint-sized third baseman. Like everyone, I had my defeats and I had my victories in the hot corner. The painful memories of the former helped me better savor the thrill of the latter whenever it came along. And the combination drove me to succeed when I later went out for a career, for a family, for life. Thomas Paine understood that without that individual liberty, Americans would just be the latest brand name in serfdom. Bernie Sanders thinks everyone should make the team and doesn't realize that if they do, by government mandate, the value of a roster position will be discounted to 0. Payne's namesake TV show understands that it is working without a net. Frankly, we like the thrill of doing it that way, and that's why we'll still be here doing it in 6 more months. I say feel the burn while you can, because if you say Senator Sanders will still be running for president in 6 months, you know what I'll say. Are you kidding me?
Welcome to Common Sense Rhode Island. This is a program where we try to make sense out of the policies that affect your lives and come up with common sense solutions. Today is our 6-month anniversary, and we're going to catch up with some of the folks that we have had interviews with in the past. And right now I have with me Ken Block, who came to us to talk about his new organization, which is Watchdog Rhode Island, which studied firefighter costs in Rhode Island and has helped us beat back huge property tax increases that the General Assembly had in mind for us. Welcome, Ken.
Good morning.
How is your organization going?
We have been getting a lot of attention over the last few months, and
the last week,
the last week in particular. The research that we've done and the information that we've been able to put out into the public conversation around the cost of firefighters couldn't have been more timely. The issue of the session, as far as I'm concerned, was this horrible bill to redefine overtime in Rhode Island for firefighters differently than what federal law says you can do for overtime for firefighters. This bill would have had every firefighter who worked more than 42 hours in a week get paid time and a half. Federal law says that a firefighter working overtime doesn't have to have overtime kick in until 53 hours.
Okay, let me just stop you a minute. You're talking about the Federal Fair Labor Standards Act.
Yes.
All right, which is used across the country.
Everywhere apparently, but as our legislators were trying to do, but in Rhode Island.
Rhode Island was going to be the only state that didn't use the FLSA?
To the best of my knowledge, that's correct.
Okay. So the Fair Labor Standards Act really regulates overtime for all kinds of employees.
Yes.
Is that right? But they have a special exemption or a carve-out for firefighters. What's that carve-out?
That says for firefighters who work 24-hour shifts, the average work week could be 53 hours per week without overtime.
Okay, so they actually studied this, did all of the data collection, and they came up with 53 hours for firefighters as being fair.
Correct. And what's outrageous...
Fair Labor Standards Act.
What's outrageous is that deep into the end of the session, a bill, a very unfair bill, was put forward by the firefighter unions. They found a sponsor in House Whip Jay Edwards, and as far as I know,
he found support from a lot of other representatives.
And they had support. Leadership clearly wanted the bill, or could not have been put forward so late in the session. Right. It would have disadvantaged Rhode Island cities and towns. It was a broken bill because in its original form, it would have had Rhode Island cities and towns paying overtime to firefighters for hours they currently work that are not overtime eligible right now. It would have cost cities and towns a fortune. There was no fiscal impact statement attached to the bill.
I don't think they cared.
They clearly didn't. But the good news is there are very few issues in Rhode Island that can get bipartisan local support. We had Democrats, we had Republicans, we had town managers, we had everybody come together at the local level to push back against this bill, and they did so effectively.
Now, the reason this bill came up was because North Kingstown had for years, and I think it was like 5 years, gone through a legal procedure, negotiating with their firefighters union, going to court, going to another court, going to another court, going to another court. They paid about $600,000 in legal fees and managed to get to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said that a town has the right to just say unilaterally there can be a 3-platoon structure. 3-platoon structures do what?
With a 3-platoon structure working 24-hour shifts, one group of firefighters works for 24 hours, then they go home for 48 hours. The second group of firefighters comes in for the next 24 hours, they go home for 48 hours. So you have 3 groups of firefighters working in a rotating 24-hour shift.
So they work one day and they get 2 days off.
Correct.
And not just days and nights, 24
Correct.
hours, 48 hours.
That's correct.
Nice schedule.
It is. You work about 123 days a year with that schedule.
Wow. And then there's your vacation time comes off of that, and sick time. And
Yeah, firefighters, generally speaking, across the country, love the 24-hour shift schedule.
Yeah,
The
gives them a
reviews-
lot
the
of
reviews
time to
on
be
it.
with their family, do other work.
right. That's
Sure.
right.
North Kingstown, my understanding, saves about $2 million a year, or about 25 to 30% of their firefighter costs by going to the 3-platoon structure. That's why it was a Republican administration down there, I believe, but I think that's why they fought for that. But Mayor Elorza also wanted to look at the 3-platoon structure, correct?
Correct.
What's the issues in his town?
Well, I mean, in my opinion, there's a couple, but the issue that Mayor Elorza put forward was the incredibly high cost of overtime in Providence, as much as $9 million in overtime
Which
for his
is half of
firefighters.
their deficit.
And what's interesting is he quantified it in terms of a daily cost. It was more than $24,000 every day in firefighter overtime costs, which is more money than he spends in a year to educate a child in his Providence schools.
Yeah, and I saw on Go Local Prov, they actually had some firefighters making $100,000, $76,000 in overtime in a year's time. That's more than most people make working their full-time job.
Sure, and what was interesting, the Providence Journal put a spreadsheet up on their website of salaries and overtime pay for every Providence firefighter in fiscal year 2014. And when we took a look at those numbers, what jumped right out at me was the fact that almost no firefighter making under $55,000 a year made any overtime in Providence.
So the ones whose overtime would be less expensive aren't getting overtime.
That's right. It was only
the ones who are more expensive get it all.
Right. And I haven't heard an adequate explanation yet for how that was possible.
Why it's not evenly distributed.
There's been some discussion of the fact that it was an academy year, so they had a bunch of new incoming recruits, but that doesn't explain all of it. And it looks to me systematic. It looks to me like there is something going on where if you are junior and you're making under $55,000 was the magic number. Under $55,000, there was very little to no overtime pay across the board.
That's the wonderful thing about collecting data and studying it. It gives you some real indications of what's broken. And that's what's so good about Watchdog Rhode Island. What is your website?
It's www.watchdogri.org, and we have a number of interesting things coming at us, and I think that you should stay tuned. There's a lot more coming.
All right. Well, let's just finish this up. So, Mayor Elorza said, listen, we've got a structural deficit here. We've got to attack it. If we don't, what's the result? If you don't go to a 3-platoon structure, what's the result for the people who live there?
Well, I mean, Providence is in dire financial straits. They're almost out of cash. So the mayor has to do everything reasonable that he can do to bring his costs in line. The costs of fire protection in Rhode Island are amongst the highest costs for fire protection in the entire country.
Yeah.
And Providence is right up there. So what he needs to do is bring down the costs, because what we've learned time and time again in Rhode Island is people typically don't want to take on any short-term pain. The problem is if you let it fester and then you go bankrupt, like what happened in Central Falls, everybody loses. I believe that what the mayor is doing is not out of line. I think that he certainly has been negotiating, and he will negotiate some sort of deal to change to the 3-platoon structure, but the cost savings that can accrue from that change have to be realized. And the most important tidbit I'll leave you with today, the vast majority of career fire departments in the United States use 24-hour shifts. They use 3-platoon structures.
Yeah, well over half.
We are in the vast minority with the 4-platoon systems that we use now.
And my understanding is he wasn't looking to get the extra hours for free. He was willing to negotiate some increase. But what he's really concerned about is, as one of the highest taxed property tax rates in the country, he just couldn't go back to people and say, give more.
Yeah.
He's got to fix the problem. And one of the problems is this overtime.
Look, my dad, who just recently passed away, lived in an apartment in Providence. And last year, his property taxes increased over 40% in Providence.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's not good for anybody.
No.
So what's the name of your website again?
www.watchdogri.org.
I encourage everybody to go and look at it, get in contact with Ken Block. We can make a difference in Rhode Island.
Indeed.
With the Planned Parenthood cover blown, the progressives would have you believe you were once a clump of cells. Are you kidding me? Hey, I have an idea. It's double the fun. It's not just birthday celebrations anymore. Now you can watch all the fun as progressives squirm with this newly minted concept. Happy Conception Day. Yes, now you can put a human face on that clump of cells the progressives say you once were. Don't remember when that was? No worries, just ask your parents. Or just go back 9 months from your birthday and voila, it's your conception day. No one can dispute that because you're here. That puts mine at roughly Halloween. Wow. Have a birthday in the winter too close to Christmas? Go back 9 months and enjoy your very own spring extravaganza. The economic benefit will be huge because we're all going to need more cake, candles, ice cream, and yes, balloons. This very human celebration that enrages progressives will be the best conception day present ever. Yes, I have an issue being called a tissue. Are you kidding me? Happy Conception Day, everyone!
Welcome to Common Sense. This is a program where we try to make sense out of policies that affect your life and come up with common sense solutions. And today we are celebrating our 6-month anniversary. So we thought it would be interesting to bring back some guests and update you on some of the policies that they informed you of and that are affecting your life. And today we have Gary Morse with us, who has been very involved in RhodeMap Rhode Island, which is a economic planning tool, supposedly, but turned out to be a housing planning tool.
Yes, housing focus.
All right, Gary, so what has been happening? Well, let's start at the federal level. What's been happening at the federal level with HUD rules? HUD is the Housing and Urban Development Department. Yes. What's been happening up there?
They have announced the new rules, the finalization of the new housing rules, where if you take any form of HUD money, you are now obligated to live by the HUD view of how housing should evolve in your community. Primarily, they are now looking at what they call economic segregation, where...
Economic segregation?
Yes.
Okay. Explain that.
The idea is there shall be no price exclusivity in neighborhoods. It should be that low income must coexist with high net worth individuals.
So if you're a community and you've used any kind of HUD grant money and you have an area of $300,000, $400,000 homes that people have worked hard to get, you have to put affordable housing there?
Yes.
If somebody wants it?
Yes.
Does that person have to work to attain the $300,000, $400,000 home?
Now, it's all about HUD's view of fairness, and fairness says that there shall no longer be price exclusivity neighborhoods.
But won't that hurt property values?
Yes, every study that's ever been done says that it will reduce property values.
Sure, if you have a $400,000 home and somebody builds a $100,000 home next to it, it hurts the property values of the whole neighborhood.
Yes.
I don't know. I grew up actually very poor, and I know that my idea of the American dream was that if you worked hard, made the right decisions, saved your money, you could get the bigger and better house. That's not true anymore?
Well, most people have gone through perhaps 5 different sales. You buy a house and you start very modest, you fix it up, and by the time you get to an upscale neighborhood, you've gone through probably 5.
You've worked hard.
Yes, you worked very hard. Lived in plaster dust and paint for all those years. So what the shortcut now that HUD wants is that they say low-income housing needs to coexist with upscale housing. They need to be side by side.
And it's considered segregation if a community says, no, we have zoning laws that say certain lot size and that it's not allowed anymore.
Again, if you take HUD money, you are now bound by the HUD rules, and economic segregation shall not exist.
Okay. And here in Rhode Island, we actually, a couple of years ago, voted to get an economic plan, right? We obviously need more jobs. We need a lot of jobs in Rhode Island, and good jobs. So we commissioned an economic development plan. Instead, we got RhodeMap Rhode Island, which says a few nice things about the economy, but mostly focuses on housing because it was HUD money that paid for it.
Yes. One of the worst parts of RhodeMap that I've been talking about is this whole idea that property taxes are pretty high in most communities. And
they're crushing.
They're crushing, and particularly in Rhode Island as compared to the rest of the nation. And what RhodeMap has proposed all along in all of the documents is that there be tax reform. Now, RhodeMap's idea of tax reform is we need to carve out a group of homeowners and rental units that don't pay any further increases in municipal costs, nothing more to go to fire, police, schools, that they be shielded, and also that they get a tax reduction of up to 80% of what you and I pay when we pay the full rate.
Yes, that bill was before the Senate Finance Committee this year.
Yes.
That would have, for the people's understanding, it says that if you have an affordable house, you pay lower. An average taxpayer pays 100% of the tax bill. Mm-hmm. If you're an affordable housing landlord or owner, you pay 8%.
8% of rent.
8% of rent.
What you and I pay, and most people pay, is you pay a percentage of your assessment times the cost of the municipal budget, the mill rate. It could be $18, $1,000, could be whatever, but the point is you're paying based on what the cost is to run the town. The 8% of rent is a fixed rate. It's a fixed property tax, and if you take a look at most of the unit rentals, average household in an affordable property will only be paying about $750 per year annually.
Yeah, I know that Woonsocket, I saw in a Go Local Prov article, they have the highest property tax in the state. And I know that they have come to the State House many times saying that policy of only charging 8% of the rents is killing them. They need to be able to raise it because all the other property owners there are shouldering the burden, right? The tax burden of all those subsidized or what, tax limited? I don't know what to say, tax stabilized units. Very hard on the other taxpayers in the town.
Well, we have something in the Rhode Island Constitution under Article 1, Section 2, which is called the Fair Burdens Clause. It just says that there shall be no law that, does this kind of thing, that puts a burden on one class of people to the advantage of another class of people. Everyone has an obligation to pay their fair share. And $700 or $750 a year for a household in property taxes doesn't even come close to paying the school costs or fire or anything.
No. So I know that bill was passed out of Finance Committee in the middle of the afternoon when most of us can't get there, kind of deceptively passed out, but didn't pass on the floor of the House and didn't go to the Senate. On the other hand, the Republicans had really worked very hard to get a bill passed that would rein in the tentacles of RhodeMap Rhode Island. And it was basically an opt-out provision so that any town or community out there, city, could opt out of RhodeMap Rhode Island and say, no, we're not going to participate in RhodeMap Rhode Island. And that would protect their taxpayers. You want to tell the folks what happened to that one?
Well, it passed in the House, but the Senate has yet to put in a companion bill. So it's sort of languishing. Nice idea to allow opt-out.
It would be nice if all 39 opted out.
It would be very nice if all 39 woke up and said, is this in the best interests of my community? And reality is, HUD's definition of fair housing is not necessarily a community's vision of fair housing.
And now we've gone from the American dream where if you work hard and achieve, you can reach a goal, to economic segregation.
Well, it's more on a more practical level. The high-end housing in almost every community in Rhode Island pays most of the property taxes. They pay the lion's share. If you start deconstructing that, in effect what you're doing is pushing the tax burden down to the lower income.
That's right, because their property values will deteriorate and everybody will pay more.
Yes, and so to meet a fairness objective, you're being unfair, and that's sort of counterintuitive. I don't think
it is counterintuitive. Yes. So anyway, I'm sure more of that will develop in the next session, and I hope you'll come back and share it with us.
Thank you. I'd love to.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me on.
Hillary Clinton seems like the Teflon candidate. No matter what kind of trouble she gets into, nothing sticks. But if you say, we should select a president who is the darling of the big media interests, do you know what I say? Are you kidding me? It is one thing to feel entitled to the office. It is quite another to be disqualified for the job, but to expect everyone to ignore all those danger signals. Let's have a little quiz. Do any of these names mean anything to you? Whitewater? Madison Guarantee S&L? White House Travel Office? Bill and Hillary Clinton Foundation? I could go on. There is a pattern of untruth that is attached to everything Mrs. Clinton does. She played dumb on the Benghazi attack at first. Then, Washington, D.C. reporter Catherine Herridge turned up White House records that indicate then-Secretary Clinton and President Obama spoke at length about it the very night of the attack, between the time of the initial assault and the hours later final mortar barrage that cost us 2 ex-Navy SEALs. She thought it was just fine to have a private email server in her New York home for conducting State Department business. But federal law requires the preservation of public documents. So what of the reported 30,000 emails she deleted before turning the rest over to her former department? Are you sure there were just 30,000 deleted? Are you sure that each and every one of them was about yoga or Chelsea's baby? In her first TV interview as a 2016 candidate, Mrs. Clinton was emphatic that she had never been subpoenaed on the matter of Benghazi. Well, that comment went right up Trey Gowdy's left nostril, and the chair of the House Select Committee investigating the tragedy promptly released copies of the 3 subpoenas he'd sworn out. Some say the presumptive Democratic nominee is just a congenital liar and that she goes with mistruths just to stay in practice. Oddly, that opinion is widely held in New Zealand. That's right, New Zealand. During a 1996 stop there, while on a tour of Asia as First Lady, Mrs. Clinton told an interviewer that she had actually been named after the great Kiwi mountaineer, Sir Edmund Hillary. The locals just shook their head in disbelief. In 1947, when she was born, Edmund Hillary was an obscure beekeeper on the South Island of New Zealand. Odds are he was completely unknown in Chicago, where little Hillary Diane Rodham sounded her first shrill cry. Are you kidding me?
I may steal this from you in the
Okay.
show, just to
All
look.
right,
No,
we'll
I'm
do
saying,
that.
we'll share it. Okay.
Okay, we'll share it.
I should have brought two.
Okay, welcome back. We are continuing our 6-month anniversary celebration with another former guest, Mike Stenhouse from the Center for Freedom and Prosperity. Thank you for coming.
Congratulations on your 6 months. You guys have a great show.
Well, we're working hard at it.
Yes.
You came before to talk with us about Bright Starts,
Right today,
Bright Today.
scholarship program. Yep.
All right,
Scholarship
this is a
account.
scholarship program to let our students, all up and down the scale, from kindergarten all the way up, attend schools that better suit their educational needs.
If their parents believe that's the case. Bright Today scholarships are basically an opportunity to give parents, to empower parents with the option to decide whether they want their kids to go to a different public school or to take a scholarship from the state. All local money stays local, by the way, and use that scholarship to send their child to a private school. But the parents get to decide. And that's what it's all about. We do so in a way that does not harm public schools, either financially or academically. We've done the research, we've looked at national models, and we've put together a program here that accomplishes those goals. It's a win-win across the board. Students win, taxpayers win, even public schools win in a sideways way. Much to what our opponents will just say anything to stop any kind of accountability with public schools.
Okay, and let's talk about that because there was a lot of heated discussion and debate about charter schools this last year. Obviously, we have some incredible, well, here in Pawtucket, we film in Pawtucket, so they have the Blackstone Valley Academy, which is a charter school that has done incredibly good things for kids. There's one in Woonsocket that one of our representatives, who's a principal, said she's partnered with and has helped her public school be better to really raise scores of students. So really, really good results for kids coming out of charter schools. But on the other hand, there's the money. And the fact that a lot of money goes towards charter schools, I had some misgivings, to be honest with you, about its effect on property taxes. How is yours different?
All right, well, two things. Let's recognize the problem first. We have the lowest graduation rate in high school in New England. Our fourth grade reading and math scores are also worst in New England. Especially at-risk students, minority students, low-income families, special needs students, especially are suffering here. So we obviously have a situation where public schools are not serving the needs of all our children. And if any one child is getting denied a good education, that's a sin. So we need to open up multiple forms of choice. We have some very limited corporate tax credit scholarship programs. They've been around for a few years. We've got very limited charter schools. We're talking about opening up a third avenue. And it's very different than the other two, to your second point. So
because property taxes are something I've always worked to lower. I think they're crushing families. And I would not want to add an additional burden.
No, we agree. Charter schools, we support them, but the math of our educational scholarship program is much less, in fact, positive financially for school districts, where with charter schools, quite simply and generally, roughly $15,000 on average would follow a student to a charter school.
Whatever a school, public school pays for them goes to the charter school.
And that would be a combination of state level and local money.
Right.
With our educational scholarship program, a maximum of $6,000 follows a child to a school of their parents' choice, and it only comes from the state portion of the funding formula. So all local money, everything you pay in taxes to your locality, stays for use in your public schools. In fact, our program creates net positive impact for the school district, which means if they wanted to, they could give that back to the taxpayers and lower property taxes. But that would be up to the school district and the town to decide. So
65 to 70% of every town's budget goes towards schools, our property taxes. That stays at the local level. So it's only our state matching money that would go to the scholarships.
Right.
and it's limited to $6,000?
Yeah, it's capped at $6,000. It is income adjusted, so if you're a pretty high earning family, you're going to get maybe 10-15% of that $6,000 scholarship. If you're anywhere middle or low income, you're probably going to reach the full scholarship. But every family under this legislation that was submitted last year, and by the way, it was bipartisan, Democrat-led legislation in both the House and the Senate.
Yes, I think
would apply to every family.
Representative Mike Chippendale, a Republican, and
Ray Hull,
a
Providence, right?
A Providence Democrat.
Yes.
They were the co-sponsors.
They were the co-sponsors in the House, and Senator Mark Cody, a Democrat, was the lead sponsor in the Senate, along with Nick Kettle, who you know well as well.
Yeah.
So we're very pleased with where we were. We did great research last year, making the case for why we need an expanded choice option. And it's only
$6,000 that comes out of the school, so they actually get to keep all of their local money.
That's right.
If it's $15,000, they're actually keeping $9,000, but not the child.
That's right. The way the bill is written is the child would still count towards the funding formula from the state, so they would basically still be raising the $15,000 per child locally and statewide, but they'd only be sending out a maximum of $6,000.
I mean, property taxes is important.
Very.
So I'm glad that there's not that impact the charter schools has. And honestly, I was a teacher. One of the things that you alluded to it, when you aren't teaching a child to their maximum ability, there's a huge lack of potential. I mean, there's a life that's not getting on the rungs and moving up that ladder.
Everybody agrees that education reform is economic development.
Absolutely.
This kind of education reform is sweeping the nation. Rhode Island needs to be on board. Rhode Island needs to catch up. We know there are a lot of manufacturers and other employers who can't find qualified students.
Bring that up.
Yep.
They're really, again, I was a special educator. I know a lot of kids learn better in different kinds of environments. Not every child learns the same. Most of them can sit in a regular classroom and do fine, but sometimes others need a different way to learn. One of the real tragedies is when they don't learn, and you come up, they graduate from high school, big day for them, they go out and look for a job, and they're not qualified.
Well, and even more, and even more so, even in the interim step. We did an essay contest a few years ago at a inner city group in Providence, and some kids wrote essays how when they knew they didn't get a good education and still wanted to push forward, and they would go to Community College of Rhode Island. They had to relearn everything. They had to basically spend their first 2 years relearning. So not just for the job market, but even for higher education, we are not effectively preparing our kids for life or for careers. And that's all every parent wants on education, is to prepare their kids for life.
To your point, it's economic development.
Yes.
If you don't have a good education, you're not going to get a good job. And our manufacturers, I know our manufacturers have been complaining for years. They have jobs. They have jobs that are open. They can't find young people with the skills to fill them.
And to think that administrators could design a government-run, one-size, cookie-cutter, fits-all solution that's going to adequately educate every kid and effectively prepare them for life is just unreasonable. This is why we must empower parents and let them put their kids in the proper learning environment, and do so, again, without harming public schools. That's what this program will do. BrightToday.org, Bright Today Educational Scholarships.
Well, we need to look at it. We need to see what we can do, because kids need the best education they can handle.
Let's get it done.
Let's get it done.
Okay, thank you.
Well, it's a study in the human mentality, entitlement style. Are you kidding me? Last week, Jay's Deli in Woonsocket threw up the white flag at one of their locations, saying they had to close the location because they just couldn't find quality help. Here's an excerpt of the sign that can be found on the door as seen in the Woonsocket patch. Due to our repeated unsuccessful efforts to hire a full team of quality associates to join us at this location of Jay's Deli, we have made the difficult decision to temporarily suspend operations at this location only. A full team of motivated and friendly staff is required to offer our best quality and service to you, our loyal guests. The owner, James Halal, says he's tried to hire a quality staff, even paying well above minimum wage. One problem is some employees just didn't take the job seriously. Here's a math equation that predicts a potential outcome of this roadie scenario. High-quality sandwich shop plus entitlement-minded, device-addicted, self-absorbed, it's all about me employees equals I have to close one of my sandwich shops. Still have to pay rent for a closed sandwich shop divided by 2 locations equals uptick in sandwich prices. Uptick in sandwich prices times too much month at the end of the money customer equals, well, you get the picture. Society is definitely in decline here, and at the expense of a high-quality local small business. Are you kidding me?
Okay, welcome back. Today we're having a 6-month anniversary, and we're doing that by going back and talking with some of our guests to bring you up to date on what's been happening on the issues that they were following. And right now we're going to talk with Mike Riley. He is a financial advisor for 40 years and a hedge fund manager. You're the founder of Beach Street Financial Services and Coastal Management Company. Group.
Yep.
All right, so you know a lot about financial services.
I was on Wall Street for 35 years competing with the biggest banks in the world.
Okay, and you have really taken it to heart to look at Providence's expenses, its problems, especially with its pension fund.
Yeah.
Why are you doing that, by the way? Why is that important to you?
Because abuse of power bothers me, and I know that's what's going on in Providence and other places in Rhode Island. It's been pointed out through various cases. But I'm a stickler for numbers. I'm a puzzle guy, and the Providence situation just did not add up. I took a course at Stanford University in the Graduate Business School on pensions and financing to further enhance my knowledge. I did my study on the city of Providence, and at that time I noticed something very wrong in their numbers, and I've spent the last 2 years proving, and it's now been proven that I'm right. And now, even after I'm proven right, the Providence officials, the current mayor, the governor of this state, and the treasurer are all lying.
So they're keeping their eyes closed. They see no problem.
Worse than that, they are misleading, which is a federal crime.
Okay. One of the things that I'm concerned about is Providence is the largest city in Rhode Island. It gets an awful lot of state money, right?
Yes.
Just to prop it up, to support it. And if something happens there, it's going to affect everybody throughout Rhode Island. So the issue that you bring up is significant, not just the people in Providence, it's significant to the whole state.
Okay, so just taking my thing, I've proven it, it's happened, Providence actually defaulted on June 30th.
All right.
And that will create bankruptcy.
So talk to our viewers. By defaulted, you mean they were supposed to make a payment and they didn't?
$62 million on June 30th.
It's a pretty big number.
Yeah, and it turns out it's a little bit complicated. I have a report that people can read if they look at GoLocalProv or rishrugs.blogspot.com, which is my personal blog. But the fact of the matter is, it didn't take a whole lot of forensic accounting, but that's what I did. And basically, Providence has been lying for close to 20 years about the amount of money in their pension fund assets. They've
As
created
I understand it, they actually took a loan from the city to pay operating expenses, took a loan from their pension fund.
Yeah,
is that correct?
That is a correct characterization. However, normally in a loan, the person who lent the money knows about it. So if it was the pension fund who lent it, they were not aware.
They were not aware that they were loaning the money out.
Usually there's two people sign on a loan.
So they just
took it. It's called, I call it theft. They call it a change in accounting.
A change in accounting. numbers, what is it? The damn numbers or something like that. All right, so there's been $62 million missing for 20 years.
No, the amount varies and compounds. One thing we know for sure, which is terribly frightening, is that Providence was doing this because they had cash flow problems every year and are essentially bankrupt. They're bankrupt right now. And they can't pay the $62 million now, and they couldn't pay the $20 million 15 years ago. Whatever the number was each year, they couldn't pay it. And so they created a phony asset, and they stuck it on the pension books, and they used that cash flow to operate the city. That's expressly against a number of laws, including their own charter and ordinances. Yes.
Yeah.
So you're not
pension money, you're not allowed
supposed to be completely segregated.
Sure. It belongs to the retirees.
Right. But they did this. And then they continued to do that for a while, and then they couldn't even pay on June 30th. They started paying in October. So when they started paying in October, they started to do a disclosure of what they were actually doing when they paid in October. They'd put the liability on the balance sheet in June, and then they pay in October for the previous year. So now they're 16 months behind, right? So now that 4 months from July, June to October, they decided they had to discount that by the present value to give the proper number to the assets. Well, the rate they use is actually the discount rate used on the Providence pension plan, which means the city is borrowing at 8.5%. Why would the city, if it had a cash flow problem, borrow at 8.5%?
Borrow at twice the rate that they have to.
Right. You could go tax anticipation notes.
It could be so much cheaper.
Pension obligation bonds. That is disgraceful and possibly criminal.
They're doing that because they can't pay the money back.
Right. But they could have tried to get a loan, but I suspect that they didn't want to tell the truth to whoever they were borrowing from. And I think every official in this state and the city is aware of it. And I know the Auditor General's aware of it because he wrote me.
Because you've had it out there for a couple of months now, telling them, hey, do you understand this? One of the things I think that should be really disturbing to taxpayers, beyond the fact that they're paying 8.5% for money that they could borrow it for, beyond the fact that there's money that's not growing for the retirees, so it's going to be a larger unfunded liability, correct?
Not only is it
the money's not there.
Not only is it not growing, my charge was that asset didn't actually exist. It was like Wimpy's.
It was never there.
Buying it. Yeah, they just put it on this. It's an IOU, and they never had the intention of paying it off. So the current actuary was hired 2.5 years ago, when Tavares fired Buck Consultants, who had been their actuary for 90 years. 90 years. They said they fired him because of a $700,000 error. And so I didn't buy that.
Not the $62 million error.
I didn't buy that. So this new actuary came in and recently said the $62 million has to be written off.
Okay.
So now it's been removed from the pension fund.
So now the
and the City of
unfunded
Providence
liability
is up by $62 million.
Oh, wow.
It's not been disclosed by our mayor. It has not been disclosed by our governor. And recently, the state of Rhode Island went out to borrow $170 million without disclosing what's going on in Providence. I think all of that is a federal crime. I think all of that is misleading municipal bond investors.
Federal crime or not, it's not good for taxpayers. It is going to be a huge bill coming down on everybody's shoulders. The other wrinkle that I saw, because I've read your articles, is that even though that money doesn't exist, probably has never existed, you're telling me, we're paying fees to manage it. How can you how can you collect a fee on money that's not there?
The fees paid are actually attributed only to what Wainwright Investment Counsel LLC has under their purview, which is around $275 million, which is where I caught the first anomaly. Wait a second, why are you saying you have $400 million in assets and you're only managing $275? That difference in number is roughly 20% of the portfolio of what the stated assets are in Providence.
Are they charging fees on the 400? No, just on what is actually there.
On those, they're paying 8.5%.
Oh,
right?
Yes.
Because they're borrowing.
Even worse. Even worse.
Yeah. So the real deal is there's a default, and if Providence defaults because of our laws passed in 2011 and 12, state taxpayers will be eating 75% of this burden. And that's $3 billion. Not Providence, but state taxpayers.
Okay, on that sobering note, we're going to close right now. We're going to have you back in the future.
Okay.
All right, to give people an update.
This is really bad.
This is really bad. Yes. I don't know if I want to say thank you for coming, but thank you for coming.
You're welcome.
There is a scuffle going on in our country about how history should be dealt with in advanced placement exams. You know that we expect our smart kids to take AP courses in high school, which hopefully will get them into college. And many do. But now there is a lively debate as to what the authors of historical questions should be asking our young students. So if you take AP history, things are being revised. Now, it seems that in Oklahoma, a lawmaker decided to replace the recommended course guidelines that the College Board had come up with some of his own. Now, the Education Committee of the Oklahoma State House of Representatives passed a bill to replace the course framework, thus starting a national conversation. Representative Dan Fisher, Republican, is quoted as saying, quote, "Under the new framework, the emphasis of instruction is on America as a nation of oppressors and exploiters." The national battle over AP history has been going on since the middle of 2014, when the College Board implemented this new framework. The conservatives are claiming that the College Board was rewriting American history, revising things to give a more liberal viewpoint. And so the debate continues, with some spillover to the equally contentious Common Core standards. Now, I was thinking about my personal view of history. What do I know and how did I get to know it? Now, I remember taking a history course in high school, never one in college. But to this day, I have no idea what I really learned in high school, maybe across the board. But I do have all around me at home lots of books. Some of them are here in front of me. One of my favorites was written by Herbert George Wells, this be it. Best known to most of you as H.G. Wells. You might not know that this famous author of science fiction novels, The Time Machine, The Island of Dr. Moreau, The Invisible Man, and the most notable, The War of the Worlds, he also authored his very popular Outline of History in 2 volumes, and that was in 1921. The writing of that work made him a very wealthy man. That's the one I have in my hand at the moment. Now, he started in his introduction that he was making an attempt to tell, quote, "truly and clearly, in one continuous narrative, the whole history of life and mankind, so far as it is known today," unquote. Wow. Now that's a tall order for such a book. I have it on my bucket list to read this book word to word, as it may just help me understand some of the AP author's dilemma with history. Now, I wondered how Wells was going to handle this assignment of telling me all about everything, telling me the whole story of life. Chapter 1 tells me about the planet Earth and where it stands in the realm of an object in space. Got it. He goes on in Chapter 2 telling me about rocks and the first living things. And on it goes through the age of mammals, the ancestry of man. He has to tell me about language, civilization, gods, serfs, and slaves. It's all there. All the notable people in history up to 1921. It's all here to read and understand. So, if I were an AP question writer, I would start with this book and go from there. Now, I also have a copy of the National Geographic's Historic Atlas of the United States, this tome, the Centennial Edition. This magnificent effort sort of takes us where Wells left off and treats the world from the American perspective of National Geographic. A lot of pictures. We get to see how things evolved from 1400 to 1988 in America. There are 450 photographs, 90 graphs, and 140,000 words of text in this wonderful book. If you want to get a taste of what happened in America, this is a great way to do it. But of course, there are hundreds of thousands of historical works that an AP writer could pull questions from. So I don't really understand why we are having this debate. Personally, I would like to pursue the history of the earthworm as my pet historical project. Can you imagine life without worms? Thank you for watching, and God bless.